Welcome to Brexit Unlocked, a new regular weekly show to keep a beady eye on Brexit. I'm Martin Daubney and this is Belinda, DeLucy. We are two former MEPs for the Brexit Party, joined by four others later. Well, look, after a nuclear winter of COVID-19, Brexit is back where it belongs. Today's Daily Express: Britain shall not be moved. PM will defy threats from EU to pull the plug on talks. Belinda.
We have the Daily Telegraph that says the EU gives UK 20 days to retreat on the Brexit bill.
There's also a picture of Winston Churchill being defaced by the Yobbos and Extinction Rebellion. That's a whole separate story. Now let's go to the Romaniac's favourite, the Financial Times. Brussels threatens number 10 with legal action over breach of Brexit treaty. Johnson given ultimatum. EU wants bill's clauses withdrawn. And one for you, and Widdecombe, Tory rebellion looms.
Yes, we have the eye here. Ultimatum sets up bitter EU divorce in a predictably miserable headline there.
So forget Europe, the final countdown. We are now approaching all-out warfare. We've had threats of extensions being ignored, breaking international law. The EU is rattling its sabre overnight, threatening trade wars, tariff being imposed, and deadlines with big fines attached. Make no mistake, this is the end game. After years and years of wangling and wrangling, ducking, diving, and political pantomime, this is now the end game. Will we finally get a Brexit of any worth done, or will we once again be betrayed?
Yes, and to discuss this, we have a stellar lineup of Brexiteers. We have 6 former Brexit Party MEPs joining us. We have Anne Widdecombe, June Mummery, Ben Habib. We've got the wonderful Martin Daubney and myself, Belinda, DeLucy, and we're hoping for Brian Monteith to join us a bit in the middle of the show.
Good. Now, it would make sense to start with the most prestigious, the most cherished of the MEPs. We had Anne Widdecombe. HMS Widdecombe has just sailed into port. And let me tell you this, the guns are blazing before we started this morning, in fine form as you'd expect. Now, Anne, I'd like to start by getting you to respond to a few of these very recent developments. Michel Barnier once again playing tough, Boris standing firm. Where do you think this is going to go, Anne?
It would be a very brave person who predicted that. I don't think Mystic Meg could tell you where it's going to go. But what we've got here is a storm that has arisen from several things. First of all, of course, Boris's original proposal to put a border down the Irish Sea. Now, everybody could see that that was going to lead to massive difficulties, that it could eventually threaten the Union. But Boris was quite stubborn about it and hailed the whole agreement as a wonderful thing, fantastic, etc., etc. And I think we probably wouldn't have this problem, but for the fact that the withdrawal agreement was always predicated on the assumption that there would be a deal. Now, we're moving towards a time when it looks as if there actually may not be any deal at all. And so, of course, the UK's got to legislate for that. And Boris now finds himself in a bind, frankly, of his own making. Now, let me say right away, I understand the reservations of people who've spoken in both the Commons and the Lords, including Michael Howard, who's a very clear Brexiteer, and who have said they're worried about Britain being too cavalier about just junking its obligations under international law. And I understand that, and I don't think we'll help ourselves if we try to ride roughshod over that. But it is a fact that if there is no deal, we do have to legislate for how we cope internally, and we do have to look at the Northern Ireland situation. And I think the EU would be much better advised to try and understand that than to just take the line that they're taking at the moment, because quite inevitably now, what's going on is going to lead to no deal. But it will also lead to a huge amount of international wangling. Now, don't get too worried about they're going to take legal action against us. Suing in the international courts is very, very long. It's very expensive and they ain't got no money and they won't be having ours in the future. The outcome is never fully guaranteed. Of course, it's perfectly possible to withdraw from a treaty. So I think that they're on to a losing wicket. I don't think they mean it. I think they're just shouting the odds at the moment.
And how much strength, Anne, do you think the revolt in the Tory party against Boris's announcement, how much strength do they have? Do you think they'll succeed? Do you think the Lords has a chance to obstruct once again Boris trying to advance Brexit?
I think there will be a rebellion, and that rebellion will be between two sorts of people. The first, who are genuinely worried about breaking an international agreement and who will be rebelling in good faith, but I suspect a much larger rebellion of those who simply don't want us to go down the route of no deal and probably don't even want us to leave. So will there be a rebellion? Yes, don't forget he's got a majority of 80. He can probably ride down a rebellion. But let's understand that there is much more to it than just this issue of the withdrawal agreement. There's a lot more to it than just Brexit. There's a huge dissatisfaction with his leadership at the moment, largely emanating from COVID. And I think, therefore, when you see a rebellion, some MPs will be using that as a conduit to rebel against Boris rather than against the exact internal market bill as such. So, will it be a rebellion? Yes. Will it be big enough? I doubt it. When it goes to the Lords, that is a serious matter. Their lordships are of a very different composition up there from the House of Commons. And so there could be a standoff, but the fact is that the Commons is supreme. And I would expect Boris to prevail eventually. Meanwhile, I just hope, I wouldn't want to put money on it, but I just hope he doesn't go down the route of yet another extension.
Oh no, that just sent a shiver down my spine. I was enjoying it so much until that moment.
It was going to be June, it was going to be July, now it's going to be the 15th of October. Anybody really place bets on that happening?
Okay, there's two things I wanted to sort of follow up on there. And first of all, how do you think, let's do it in easy terms, marks out of 10, how is Boris doing on Brexit?
4 out of 10, I would give him.
4 out of 10.
I think he does want Brexit. I don't think there's any doubt about that. I don't think he's so keen on a no-deal Brexit. I think that is a lot of saber-rattling because he has kept putting off the moment of saying, okay, you know, we've reached an impasse and now we have to go for WTO. He's put that off so often that I doubt his commitment to that extent. And my own view is that we should have walked out at the end of June and said, right, that's it, we're getting nowhere, we want to get somewhere. And that would have given them time to have come back and for us to have then started getting somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like if they wanted no deal, they would have done it by now.
They would have done it.
Yeah.
And so what we've done is we've just put back and therefore truncated the period in which things could be sorted out. Now, if I were a businessman now, I would be saying, right, I'm preparing for WTO because it looks almost inevitable.
I did want to ask you though, just say, I mean, obviously this is music to our ears if we are reaping the benefits of the useful idiots, such as the Gina Millers, putting us towards an increased likelihood of no deal. But if this is brinksmanship, if this is all games again, and if Boris does talk tough, I know we're going to come to June Mummery in a bit and talk specifically about the importance of things like fishing, state aid, the level playing field. If Boris uses this bluster and then waters down Brexit and we start seeing a brino, where do you think that would leave Boris's credibility and indeed the entire Conservative Party?
I think it would leave Boris's credibility in shreds if that is what happened. We have to be grown-ups and to say that whenever you have an international negotiation, both sides have to make some concessions. But what the EU is demanding is full concessions. It's that we own our own waters, but not the fish in it. What sort of reasoning is that? And that we have to abide by their rules, even though we've left. Now, there would be no point in leaving if we were going to be tied to their rules. That is a nonsense. And a good reason for leaving is so that we can indeed support industries where necessary. That means state aid. And we couldn't do that under EU rules until, of course, the COVID crisis, when quite suddenly they decided that this rule was no good after all, but they were going to bring it back in. So I feel that we would lose too much, and even far better to have no deal than to compromise on those issues. But there are always concessions, and I'm a grown up. You know, even if you were negotiating with Canada, there would have to be some things between each side that, you know, they didn't necessarily want. That is what is called a negotiation. It inevitably entails that. But the big issues of principle, that we own our own waters and all that therein is, that we are not bound by the ECJ and by EU rules, those big issues of principle must stay.
I would love to know your thoughts on Nancy Pelosi's latest threat that there will be no deal if Boris touches the WA, when in fact many would say that the withdrawal agreement actually does threaten the Good Friday Agreement in itself by trying to change the constitutional status of Northern Ireland without the consent of its people. So what do you make of the American reaction, and what are your thoughts if Biden wins for the trade deal with America, between the UK and America?
We've now got to do what is best for Britain and not listen to anybody else's threats. We've got to do what is best for Britain. Now, the nation decided it was best that we leave the EU, and we've done that first stage of leaving. It is best for Britain that we control our own waters, that we can prop up any industries that we so choose, that we are free to create our own conditions without being tied by EU rules. And let me just remind you, and I do this all the time because it's quite important, there was a period during the premiership of John Major when we in the UK got 40%, 40% of all the inward investment that came from both America and Japan. 40% of it came to us in Britain. Why? Because we were nicely positioned geographically, but we had the most flexible labour market, because John Major had negotiated an opt-out from the social chapter. We had the most flexible labour market. We were setting our own rules lawfully because we'd negotiated the opt-out. Tony Blair, one of the first things he did was give up that opt-out. But I look to what happened when we had it. We were getting huge amounts of inward investment because we were so flexible. And we've got to have that ability to be flexible again.
I've got one final question, Anne, before we let you go. You gave Boris Johnson's government a 4 out of 10. I'd like to ask you where you think the Brexometer currently sits. If 10 is a pure, clean break Brexit, the sort of which we've been campaigning for, and 0 is a complete capitulation, where do you think we are today?
As I say, Mystic Meg couldn't tell you. I mean, there are so many. I mean, first of all, there's the sound of all the sabre rattling going on. There's all the brinkmanship that's being played. There's both sides seemingly completely intransigent. I wouldn't like to predict it, but I think we are nearer than we have ever been to the clean break. Doesn't mean we're going to get it, but we're nearer than we have ever been.
Thank you so much, Anne. We're going to crack on with some fantastic questions regarding our fishing and where we stand. Martin?
Yeah, I mean, look, I just want to say right at the outset here that June Mummery is one of the most principled, forthright, and sometimes, let's be honest, a little bit scary MEPs that we've had. Very privileged as a nation to have someone as outspoken as her, standing up for the coastal communities. I think we all agree from the very, very outset, certainly within the realms of this political party, that fishing was an absolute red line. Surrendering waters in any capacity, to me, was never going to be an option. And I think there were some really emotional moments. If you cast our minds back to when we had that meeting where we all agreed we were going to vote for Boris's deal, and we had some serious reservations about that. June, Mummery, it's great to see you again, darling. Now, I know in many senses, I think you had one of the biggest battles, didn't you, voting for that, because of what the consequences could be if there was a sellout on fishing. Now, you're on the ground, you work in a fish market, you're around the fishing communities, you've got the ear of the industry. What's the mood amongst the coastal communities of the United Kingdom and the fishing community about what's been going on in the Brexit negotiations so far, June?
Well, the mood at this moment in time is we're really, really impressed with David Frost. We think he's doing a wonderful job over in Brussels and speaking to Mr. Barnier and holding firm, which is what we need. The trouble we have is what is going on in Parliament. We're very, very worried that they could be undermining the good work that David Frost is doing, or Frosty the No Man, as we call him. And so, you know, we really have to look at that. I mean, let's be mindful. There are 186 coastal MPs. These MPs should be fighting tooth and nail for their constituencies and their constituents. Simple as that. That's their job. They are elected into that position to ensure that we take back full control of our waters and the resource. That's the deal. Simple as that. That's why they got their position they've got, and that's the job they need to do. So they need to be actually behind Mr. Frost and ensuring that ministers are doing the right thing. The trouble the industry has, they have no voice. The majority of the ear of government goes to the big boys, people like the NFFO, National Federation of Fishermen, which is great. But these people represent foreign interests too. So their paymasters are foreign interests. You know, I talk to fishermen, they're not sure. The simple thing is this, Martin and Belinda, we need to take back full control of our waters and the resource to rebuild coastal communities that are quite frankly on their knees. They've had the heart. It's as simple as that. I see people who can't afford to pay the bills, can't put bread on the table. As you know, I done the coastal tour last year with the Brexit Party, as you know, going, you know, to as many coastal towns as I could, and I was horrified at what I saw. You know, some of the worst places. I mean, Lowestoft's not great, Great Yarmouth, but you go to places like Fleetwood, Hull, Grimsby, and they're on their knees.
Absolutely.
We've got a bright future ahead. We know we can do that. We're that close. Why on earth would any government rip that away from us now? So the feel at the moment is, you know, oh, June, what can you do this? Can you do that? It's difficult for me. I haven't got a platform, but I tell you what I have got. I have got that great British public behind me, and they are listening and watching. And if Boris decides to pull the plug on that, well then, he's finished in my eyes.
That's absolutely ridiculous. We are an island and we can't even sustain a fishing industry because of the awful decisions our government and the awful rules and regulations from the EU that have been forced upon us. You know, and we're a fishing island. We're supposed to be thriving. Our coastal communities have their own economies. And that's why, so many reasons why I love what you're doing, Joan. You've really brought the focus into the fact that there are more economies other than just London and cities. It's the coastal economies that deserve, after all these years of being ignored and belittled, to have attention on them. That's what we voted for.
You know, like I said, they are not listening to the industry. It's so important. You need to speak to the people that are actually doing the job, the people that work on the shop floor, that know that industry inside out. They're not listening to that. They're listening to the money.
What about old Gary Lineker wading in this week, saying that fish and chips was created by immigrants? It's not even British.
Oh, Gaza. Well, is it? I've been told that the actual person, the entrepreneur John Lee, created fish and chips in a wooden hut in Moseley Market, Lancashire. So, I mean, come on. People say, did we invent the curry? But for Gary Lineker, he always has to, he likes to be relevant.
Yeah, and surely the point is, wherever its roots come from, we made it our own. We made it British, you know, and I think it was Paul Embry on Twitter who said, it'd be like Gary Lineker going over to India and saying, do you know your beloved Indian democracy? Well, it's not yours, it's British. I mean, you don't, it's ridiculous, and it's quite an extreme way of thinking. And secondly, he could have used his platform to encourage people to buy locally sourced fish and encourage, you know, people to really support the industry instead of using it as an opportunity to virtue signal and sort of gut the British stomach of all the patriotism and links to our wonderful fish and chip dish.
And also, June, don't you think that the bottom of what Lineker says is kind of sneering contempt that once again we're anti-immigrant? And when have we ever said that we're anti-immigrant? The whole conversation actually is about controlling illegal immigration. But look, June, what about the idea of a Fish Friday that we can really get moving? We can encourage people to eat more fish. Can you come on the show every Friday and tell us about how to eat more fish, recipes, what's going on, what's seasonal?
Fish and chips was always a thing on a Friday. I can remember having that. Yeah, we need to promote our fish more. The trouble we have with this is a lot of the fish that are in our supermarkets is actually farmed fish, which basically is a load of rubbish. When I look at the fishing industry and the devastations that has happened in our waters, I mean, with the super trawlers, electric pulse fishing, you know, we're targeting different species of fish. We're messing about with Mother Nature, which I totally disagree with. You know, I can see our future for Great Britain being this. We will have the most finest sustainable fishing industry in the world. I have no qualms about that whatsoever, but we must stay strong and firm and do the right thing, which is get on with it, roll your sleeves up and get on with some damn hard work.
You know, there's another thing that really gets my goat about this debate, and that is, you know, people like James O'Brien actually go, well, I mean, it's only 0.1% of the British economy. Why do you guys get so uptight about it? And it's like, well, they completely fail to get the point that as a percentile of the coastal communities, it's much greater, and think how much bigger it could be if we just invested some of those billions of pounds we gave to the European Union every year into those communities, into the industries, and think how prosperous those ports could be again, June.
Without a shadow of a doubt. And like I always bang on about this, one job at sea is 8 on land. And people say, well, how do you work that out? Well, this morning, for example, fisherman comes in, land his fish with me, I sold it. So as the fisherman's been fed, I've been fed. I sold it to a producer. He's produced it. He's then sold that to a restaurant. He's then sold, the restaurant has prepared it, we've eaten it. That's 5 people. That is fed. That's without. We'll need ships built. We want a fleet of boats from shipbuilding. Then you then take on your welders, platers, electricians, plumbers. There's jobs upon jobs upon jobs, and not just that. You know, I see a lot of people that leave school who aren't academic, who struggle. There's always a job down the fish market, or on a boat going to sea, or working on a yard and being a plumber, painter. I think we've all lost grip of what fishing is all about, and what a wonderful industry it is.
And I don't know of one other trade deal where one side demands unfettered access to the other side's natural resources. And you have Barnier saying, you know, the waters may be yours, but the French are fish, or they belong to, the fish are French, or they belong to us. And I'm thinking, you've got to understand what you're saying. Your unpalatable demands for a trade deal are going to affect our coastal communities. And we have voted time and time again now to say enough. We're done with it. We want out of the EU clutches and have our fishing and our waters back so that we can grant licenses to the boats that we want in our waters. Now, why is that so revolutionary? Why is that such a controversial idea that we just want to be an independent maritime state, Jean? I mean, it's become almost extreme now.
Well, look at Iceland. You only have to say, look at Iceland, what they did. You know, they realised that we were taking advantage of them, and they said, no, we're taking it all back, and off you go. Look how successful Iceland is now. Mr. Barney will try it on. That's his job. They've employed him to do that. But we'll stand firm, and he is not going to take advantage of our country anymore.
Well, we've got to move on. We've got to move on. Fish Friday. It's fish every day for June Mummery. We're going to move on now to another of our Brexit Party MEP colleagues, Ben Habib. Ben, you've been all over the telly box this week, fighting the good fight. You saw in the close-up, you stared into the abyss. That is Emily Maitlis on Newsnight. You've been all over the airwaves, defending Brexit and getting into some of the finer detail of what's been coming out this week. So, Ben, I want to talk about some of that detail and specifically something that you've been banging on about, to quote yourself, since the very beginning, and that is the weaponisation of Ireland and the Northern Ireland border, and that's all coming out again this week, isn't it, Ben?
It is, and you know, as Anne mentioned, really anyone who spent 5 minutes reading that agreement back in October 2019 would have determined virtually instantly that it put a border down the Irish Sea. It left the Northern Irish people under the hegemony of the European Court of Justice, and was not consistent with the promises made by the Prime Minister, which were to take back control of our laws, our borders, and our cash. And it's a great shame that here we are, having got a Conservative majority on the basis of getting Brexit done, and we're now having to fight a rearguard action to extricate ourselves, frankly, from a crap agreement.
And can I ask you, Ben, as well, does it matter if the UK breaks international law if, in fact, all we are doing is possibly breaching a contract and not breaking the rule of law? Because, of course, this is an act of Parliament that we are using to change elements of the withdrawal agreement. It's not Boris just deciding one day to scribble things out with Tipp-Ex on the treaty. It will be an act of Parliament. And as, thanks to Gina Miller, our favourite Brexit hero, you know, Parliament is supreme and sovereign. So are we really breaching a rule of law? And even if we are breaching international law, does it matter?
I mean, as far as I'm concerned, the fundamental breach of law was never perpetrated by the UK. It was first perpetrated by the European Union. And I'm really referring here to the Article 50 process, which required the European Union to allow the United Kingdom to leave the EU pursuant to its own constitutional requirements, an emphasis on constitutional requirements. And as we're all aware, the Act of Union of 1707, 1800, and then, of course, the subsequent act which partitioned Northern Ireland off from Ireland in 1920 constitute our constitution to a very significant extent. And what the EU did was to weaponize Northern Ireland and to seek to undermine our constitution. And it did that very openly. It did that in collusion with the opponents of Brexit in this country. Some people have understandably accused those people of being traitorous. And that's because they were colluding with a foreign entity to undermine the British Constitution. And that is a fundamental breach of the European Union's treaties. And I don't think the Prime Minister, the Cabinet, Parliament has made enough of that. That message needs to get out there. We were used and abused from 2016 until 2019 at least, and the abuse continues. So it's not us breaching international treaties, it's us trying to recover from the fundamental breach that the European Union perpetrated against the United Kingdom.
There's a really interesting tweet here from Christopher Mayer, the former British ambassador to the United States and Germany, and he's saying international law here is a red herring. The problem is political, not legal. The failure of the EU to negotiate in good faith the future relationship, with the result that, absent an agreement, NI becomes by default a gateway for EU law into Great Britain unless Parliament takes preemptive action. Ben?
Yeah, I mean, he's right. It's a matter of political will. And I wouldn't stop at tinkering with the internal market to rectify the problem. You know, we've actually seen the EU's colours utterly clearly in the last week, threatening legal action against the UK if we take back control of our own country. I mean, for goodness sake, threatening us with legal action to take control of our own country. What kind of partner is that? If I were Boris Johnson, I would now absolutely just say, I would be done with the withdrawal agreement. I say, forget the internal markets bill. I'm done with the withdrawal agreement. There's absolutely nothing in that 589-page document that is good for the United Kingdom. Why is it that the EU is fighting so hard to implement the Northern Irish Protocol? It's because it's to our material detriment and to their material benefit. In that alone, we have the answers to what our government should be doing. Boris should never have got us into this position, and now it is up to him to use supreme political will to get us out.
They want us as a sort of satellite economy, and we've actually heard it recorded that they wanted to use Northern Ireland as a tactic to ensure that would happen. Now, what I really mind is that our mainstream media, from the Sky to the BBC, refuse to address these elements of the EU, their tactics to shaft us, They won't question them. They take verbatim what the EU says. And it's only because of platforms that we use and Brexit Party and other very sort of precious and sacred radio stations that are able to expose what the EU does. But our mainstream media won't address this. You saw probably today Sky and BBC leading with how the UK cannot be trusted, and they were in their element. You know, it was almost like they're enjoying the fact they can shaft the UK again, almost like they're working alongside their EU allies to get us a bad deal. Now, what Brit would do that anyway?
It's sickening to watch the way these people have bought the EU line, hook, line, and sinker. And, you know, many of the entities to which you refer, they're actually in receipt of EU funding. You know, there's a very clear link between where the EU puts its money and the support it gets in this country. But beyond that, the EU has fought a fantastic propaganda campaign. You know, it's embedded itself in the psyche of people in this country, making them believe that it's a force for good. And actually, as you and I know, and Anne and June know, having been in Strasbourg and Brussels, it's actually a malignant force. It's an anti-democratic force. It undermines the principles of democracy in the countries that can constitute its members. It's an absolutely awful entity. And we've got to be shot of it once, and we've got to get out of it once and for all.
Yes, and Ben, I do also feel like the EU doesn't really have a leg to stand on in preaching to the UK about changing the meaning of treaties in its very, very short history. You know, the EU is famous for changing what an article means in a treaty, for bending rules, bending law, for even breaking laws. You have Christine Lagarde, president of the European Central Bank. You know, her famous quote is, "We broke EU law to save the euro." They are constantly bending and reinterpreting their own laws if it means they can further integration or if it means protecting their own interests. So it is so hypocritical with their sort of pious judgment of the UK and what we're doing now, just to try and protect free-flowing trade between our own country.
They live in perpetual breach. I mean, they observe their laws more in the breach than they do in you know, consistent with them. No, the EU is famous for it. The Karlsruhe, the ultimate constitutional court in Germany, found earlier this year that the ECB had been abusing its position as the central bank of the European Union. And what did the European Union do? Well, it's just sidestepped the ECB. It sidestepped Karlsruhe, and it took money directly into its own coffers, again in breach of the acts of the European Union. It's not allowed to borrow money. It just rides roughshod over everything it doesn't like. So the notion that we now should surrender our sovereignty to the EU because of some obscure little passage in a pathetic, crappy withdrawal agreement is utterly absurd. You know, we should be just ripping it up. Boris is being timid. He needs to come out on his front foot. He needs to call them out for what they are and rip it up. He keeps referring to the EU as our friends in Europe. They're not our friends. They've done nothing friendly. They've treated us with contempt for the last 3 or 4 years. We've got to be rid of them.
So, Ben, how do you think, if you were to mark Boris out of 10 for his management of Brexit so far, I would like to know how you would score him now, but I'd also like to know how you're hoping to score him, you know, come 31st of December, where you think he might end up. So give us your scores for Boris.
Okay, well, I think Boris has a real problem because he leads a party which is pregnant with Remainers, this expression I've used before. You know, he returned 136 Remain voting MPs to Parliament alongside himself in December. And I think that was a huge mistake for the Conservative Party. They'd seen what trouble Remain voting MPs had caused in the past. And remember, it was Brandon Lewis who voted Remain, who was the member of cabinet that actually first claimed that we were breaching international law. He's the one who set this hair running. You know, we ought to just bear that in mind when we consider what effect it is to run a government that is pregnant with Remainers. What he should have done was got rid of the Remainers at the last election, had an entirely pro-Brexit party, which is the will of the nation, having expressed it in 4 plebiscites, including the referendum, and he should have given us a proper Brexit at day one. He championed a deal which he himself had described as being a surrender document. He championed it on the basis that he'd been so clever to go back to the European Union, open up the withdrawal agreement, get rid of the backstop, and actually give them Northern Ireland. And now we see the misrepresentation that he made, because he's scrabbling around trying to undo the damage he did to the union. He signed it into law knowing that it put a border down the RC, and now he's fighting a rearguard action. So I'm afraid Boris gets about, I think Anne's being generous. So far, he's at 3 out of 10 for me at most. Rhetoric's great. I'd give him 8 out of 10 on rhetoric, which is how he got to where he is. But on actions, I'm afraid he's at about 3. And what do I want him to do? I want him to go WTO, and I want him to tear up the withdrawal agreement.
But to his credit, I mean, coming out, it's been quite ballsy and explosive coming out with this, I'm rewriting key elements of the WA. Do you not give him some credit for that, Ben?
I do, I have to. My heart lifted enormously when I read the bill. The bill was actually better than what it was mooted to be. I thought the bill was merely going to control the flow of goods from Northern Ireland to Great Britain and to prevent the creeping control of EU state aid law from Northern Ireland into Great Britain. Actually, the bill goes further than that. It tells the European Union, we're not going to allow you to have EU state aid law in Northern Ireland. And that's what's sending them apoplectic. They see that we're gripping back our country.
On the Brexometer, with 10 being the clean, no deal break, where are we today?
You know, if he implements the IM bill, and if it's implementable, I'm not wholly in agreement with Anne that he may be able to implement it. You know, while we're in the transition period, the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom is actually the European Court of Justice. It's not the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom. And if we pass this bill right now, while we're in the transition period, they have up to 4 years to bring an action against us. And I don't think they'll bring an action for damages. I think they'll bring an action for specific performance, as we call it in the business world, forcing the United Kingdom to honour the terms of the withdrawal agreement. That's the kind of action that they'll want to bring. And they'll be able to do it, I think, in UK courts. And they will try to direct UK courts to find against the IM bill and in favour of the withdrawal agreement. And the ultimate arbiter, because of the way the withdrawal agreement is drafted, is the European Court of Justice.
So you're saying, Ben, that they can use Article 4 of the withdrawal agreement to then take it to our UK courts to then force us to take on the WA, even if it goes against our Act of Parliament?
It's something, again, the Brexit Party banged on about last year. We must not have the European Court of Justice as our supreme legal authority once we've left the EU. And Boris has left them in there until the end of December. And that gives them huge sway over what happens in the UK. And I think this point needs to be looked at by constitutional lawyers.
I want no deal to be willed into action. I hope all of this brinksmanship means that we get what we want, but you're not quite so optimistic, are you, Ben? So come on, I'm going to push you one final time.
I think Boris fears no deal. You know, he moved the deadline for negotiations from 30th June to September. He's now moved them to the 15th of October. I suspect 15th of October will come and go. And even if we pass the IM bill, I think he'll pursue a deal. In my view, he'll do a soft deal to try and avoid all the argy-bargy. That deal won't be done until the 11th hour. And what we'll have is an emergency meeting of the Council of Europe so that they can approve the bill. There'll be an emergency meeting of the European Parliament so they can approve the deal. And at 31st December, we'll have a kind of really fudgy deal. And Boris will say it's the best deal since sliced bread. And people like me will be reading it and holding their heads in their hands going, oh my goodness, it isn't.
Wow. And Brian Monteith have been waiting patiently in the wings. Great to see you. Here's a man who leapt to fame on social media in Eastern Europe. He became a 6 million YouTube sensation when he roared, "My flag is not a glass of water." Was that a good Scottish accent?
That was fantastic.
Or was that terrible? But here's a man who roared in Parliament, and he's been up there north of the border having a pop, keeping that guard dog Brexiteer spirit on Nicola Sturgeon, who's your Antichrist, the bête noir to you. Brian, welcome to Brexit Unlocked. And I specifically want to ask you, what the hell is going on north of the border in terms of rattling a sabre, using COVID, using Brexit as an excuse for Sturgeon to push for a second referendum.
What in fact has been happening is that we need to take ourselves back to early in the year before coronavirus came on the scene. And Nicola Sturgeon was actually languishing and had been languishing for a good time in popularity. And the advent of COVID, she saw an opportunity. And it was an opportunity which was there simply because the UK government involved all the assemblies and parliaments that are constituent in our great country to inform them through the COBRA briefings as to what was being done. And of course, the Welsh Senate, Stormont in Northern Ireland, and the Scottish Parliament in Holyrood all have various responsibilities. So it was right and proper. They were briefed and told this is the decisions that the UK government's taking, and you're responsible for health, particularly public health. You need to consider these and take your own actions, but we need to coordinate. And all of a sudden, Nicola Sturgeon, whether it was an advisor or she herself, suddenly went off and started doing the same daily press conferences that started. And as a result, there became an opportunity. And this opportunity was to weaponize the COVID pandemic by doing some things differently. And some of those things that were done differently were done later, a few days later. They were always badged as by the Scottish government, not by the UK government. The money, even though it might be coming from the Treasury and was being sent from Whitehall, would be badged and reprocessed by the Scottish government, a saltire put on it. And in fact, what we found was that some of the money that had been promised by the Chancellor for businesses, and everybody would expect that was for all businesses across the UK, was then handled differently in Scotland. So many pubs and cafes and restaurants suddenly found they did not qualify for the same amount of money that the pubs, cafes and restaurants qualified for in, say, England. So she weaponised the process, branded it as Scottish government, and we'd make different announcements. So we had the tragedy, and it's an absolute scandal, you may not be aware of this, but we had the tragedy, a mistake that the British government made, the UK government made, by sending people from NHS wards into care homes, particularly elderly people, into care homes without being tested, which is in itself was a scandal, was eventually identified, and Matt Hancock changed the rules that people leaving hospital had to be tested for COVID before they were moved, because of course this was transporting the virus into care homes, and this undoubtedly cost a number of lives. Now, Nicola Sturgeon and our health minister, Jean Freeman, held up that decision by 10 days. 10 days, which meant that more people were being sent in Scotland with COVID than were in the rest of the UK. And it's no surprise, therefore, that the rate of coronavirus in Scottish care homes is double that than it is in England. Yet Sturgeon is praised in metropolitan circles, in London media, as somehow being better at managing the COVID pandemic than the UK government. It is a complete fallacy, it's a myth, but that's the sort of thing that's been going on.
From your perspective, on the ground, what's the feeling about a second referendum?
When people are asked what they will think of an issue, it doesn't mean that's the most important issue to them. And indeed, when people are asked about what they think about independence, in the sense of ranking, then in fact it's way down. It's not the top issue. People are naturally concerned about the pandemic. They're concerned about the economy, their jobs, the health of themselves, families and extended families. Those are the important issues. The most recent polls, as John Curtis talked about in his Brexit Watch interview, was that we've now had something like five polls or announcements of polls that have shown support for independence. But again, this has to be taken with a degree of pinch of salt, in as much as the origins of the polls, the questions that are being asked, they're not the same question as appears appeared on the referendum ballot paper. And there has been no real debate about independence. People are focused on other issues like the virus. I think unionists, people who believe in preserving the United Kingdom, should be concerned because it's not one-off. It appears to be a trend, and it's an unwelcome trend. But the truth is that I believe, the truth is that we have the strong arguments to win any vote, and indeed that the pandemic make these arguments even stronger.
What we'd love to sort of reassure the public is that Brexit is not that big scary threat to the union between England and Scotland, as Nicola Sturgeon keeps promoting the idea that it is, and actually it could make us much closer, especially when we are outside of all the financial obligations that the other member states are going to be in next year because of COVID, and we actually start to work more closely together. And I think it will preserve the union more. Brexit has the opportunity to bring the United Kingdom much closer if Boris gets it right.
And I also think that if you look at how the European Union has performed throughout the COVID crisis, I mean, first it wouldn't respond to helping Italy, then it fined them for tourism breaches, then it wouldn't help Germany wouldn't help anybody else. Surely it showed that we need less Europe, we need less EU, not more, apart from enshrining billions of euros worth of debt and future dependency. I think the whole pandemic, the whole crisis has proven that we made the right decision. Finally, Brian, we've asked everybody else today. Boris has ranged between 3 and 5 out of 10. He's having a bit of a stinker. Are you going to come in now and give Boris a cracking score to make his day feel better? Or are you going to pile yet more misery on the shoulders of the Prime Minister? Brian Monteith, how do you score Boris Johnson on the Brexit negotiations thus far?
Brexit negotiations, I'd give him a higher score than I'd give him on things like COVID or the economy, to be fair. And so overall, I'd have to say, I actually think that he's conducted through the choice of David Frost, through the approach of saying a lot of the right things. I think he deserves plaudits. The difficulty comes is when as we look at the Brexit barometer that we have, is that the rhetoric is not matched by the actions. Now, the new internal market bill suggests a toughness that has been long overdue. So I'd give Boris a 5 at the moment.
I think I have to agree with you, actually. I think Boris recently, he's gone up on the scale, in my opinion. We'll only know if he's that beautiful 10 out of 10 on the 31st of December, of course, when, as you say, his rhetoric matches his actions.
And I think we can wrap up today's show, guys. This is the first. We're going to be doing this every week from now on. It's so vital that we apply the pressure. We analyse this with a ruthless scrutiny. We must make sure we get this Brexit done. I said at the top of the show, this is the end game now. It's the final countdown. We must keep the pressure high. We must keep the information flow open. All of you Brexiteers out there that are watching, send us your comments. What do you want to ask? Who do you want on the show? We've got some MPs, some big hitters teed up. June, you guys, please come on regularly. Belinda, have you enjoyed it? Isn't it great to be back, to get the band back together?
It's fantastic, and remember, it's only because of people power that Brexit has got thus far. Had we not lifted a finger and May had got all her rubbish through, we'd have been in the doldrums right now. So we've got the power, stay engaged, and let's stop the EU trying to clip our beautiful Brexity wings. And it's been fantastic to have the panel on. Thank you so much for coming on. Thank you everyone watching. Please spread the word, keep engaged, keep active, keep holding the Tories' feet to their fire. They owe us. And let's see what happens come December the 31st. But we'll see you next Friday for another fantastic panel and Brexit Unlocked.
And remember, if you want to get involved, you can follow us on Facebook at Unlocked, the same on Instagram and on Twitter at Unlocked_UK_. Get those comments over. Please share. Please get involved. This is your show. Thank you very much.